want to get smarter in relationships? This is the place you want to be. Welcome to the Connie Perl Psychology Book Club. We are going to start with James Hollis's The Eden Project. Every single human culture, going back as far as we have records, has some version of this story. There's a perfect place, there's a garden, this paradise, and then there's a fall. Something happens, there's a separation, and we get exiled from that paradise. None of us can quite get back into it. Now, Hollis opens chapter 1 of the Eden Project with this observation, and his read on it is not a religious one, it's a psychological one. He thinks that this myth of the Garden of Eden is describing something that didn't happen to our ancestors, but rather it's describing something that happens inside every single one of us in the very first years of our lives, and we spend the rest of our adult relationships trying to unconsciously undo this fall. Hollis says that before you have language, before you have a self, you exist in total connection with your mother's body, literally undifferentiated from her. So there's no you, there's no me, there's no her yet. It's just one continuous experience. And then birth happens, and then slowly, over the first few years of your life, Hollis refers to something called the subject-object split that occurs. So you start to realize that there actually is me and then not me. That splitting is where your consciousness comes from. And also, this is the really important part. According to Hollis, this is where the wound comes from, the first wound. You don't get an ego and a sense of self for free. The price to pay is this separation from that original fusion. So the myth of this lost paradise that we talk about as human beings is not nostalgia for a particular place. Hollis thinks that it's actually nostalgia for a state of being, a state of not yet being separated, not being exposed, not being a vulnerable self. This is the important part, because Hollis's thesis, his argument, is that the hidden agenda underneath almost every adult relationship is the wish to go back. Not literally, but structurally. We are looking for a partner to restore that original and wordless sense of total connection. This is not just like something that a few people do. Hollis is saying that it's baked into what a relationship even is for everyone, unless you become conscious of this process, of this eternal search. This explains so much of our irrational behavior as adults. Hollis describes that before a child has the cognitive tools to understand cause and effect, it still has to make sense of its environment somehow. It has to understand what's going on. So what the child does is something called magical thinking. Small children genuinely believe on some level that they are causing what's happening around them. Mom is sad, well, that's something about me. Dad is angry, well, I caused that. The child has no way yet to know that dad had a bad day at work. That concept is not available to them yet. And that category existing completely separately from the self, from the child, from my dad is my whole universe and something is wrong, that differentiation isn't made yet. Hollis says that this distorted reading of the world becomes a template for the child. It's like an operating manual for how you read every close relationship in your life. And you do it largely without knowing that you're doing it. So if you grew up in an unpredictable or overwhelming home, some part of you might still be running that same reading years later in your adult relationship when nothing unpredictable or overwhelming is even happening in that adult relationship. Somewhere along the way, you inherited this software, this programming. And this piece is the one I want you to sit with from chapter 1, because it explains so much of so many couples' dynamics. Hollis describes 2 early categories of this early wounding. So he calls one engulfment, meaning there's too much intrusion, too much of the parent's moods and needs are flooding the child. And then there's the opposite, which is abandonment and insufficiency. Not enough presence, not enough steady attention to the child. And this is the part that's genuinely useful to you in your life. These 2 wounds don't just produce sad feelings, they actually produce opposite adult strategies for coping and dealing and looking at the world. Someone who grew up engulfed often becomes either controlling, trying to make sure that they're never overwhelmed by someone else's needs again, Or they're fiercely protective of their own space, someone who panics at too much closeness, even if they might want intimacy consciously. And then someone who grew up in the abandonment category often becomes hyper attuned to other people's needs at the expense of their own. So what we would call codependent patterns, becomes almost addictively anxious about connection, needing constant reassurance that the person is not leaving. If you've ever been in a relationship where one partner needs space and the other needs closeness, it kind of feels like a battle of the wills. And Hollis is really saying that it's not a battle of the wills at all. It's two different early wounds, each generating its own defense, colliding in real time. Neither person chose this. Both are running a code, to keep going with that software metaphor, both are running this code that was installed long before they could ever be conscious. The takeaway of chapter 1 is that most of what governs your relationship to yourself is unconscious. And most of what governs your relationships to other people is also unconscious too. And Hollis says you cannot give someone access to a self that you don't yet have access to. This really reframes this question of, why is our relationship struggling? Why are we having issues in our relationship? And it's pretty uncomfortable because it makes you start to think about, well, what don't I know about myself? What haven't I figured out about myself? It's not first a question about your partner, rather it's first a question about how much of yourself you've gotten to know and understood. The wounds, the reflexive strategies, the parts of you that are trying to quietly get back to the garden, to paradise. That's chapter 1. In chapter 2, we are gonna look at how Hollis takes this idea and applies it directly to falling in love.